Mark chapter 15, verses 1 to 15. Hear the word of the Lord. And as soon as it was morning, the chief priests held a consultation with the elders and the scribes and the whole council. And they bound Jesus and led him away and delivered him over to Pilate. And Pilate asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And he answered him, "You have said so." And the chief accused him of many things. And Pilate again asked him, "Have you no answer to make? See how many charges they bring against you." But Jesus made no further answer, so that Pilate was amazed. Now at the feast, he was used to release for them one prisoner for whom they asked. And among the rebels in prison who had committed murder in the insurrection, there was a man called Barabbas. And the crowd came up and began to ask Pilate to do as he usually did for them. And he answered them, saying, "Do you want me to release for you the king of the Jews?" For he perceived that it was out of envy that the chief priests had delivered him up. But the chief priests stirred up the crowd to have him release for them Barabbas instead. And Pilate again said to them, "Then what shall I do with the man you call the king of the Jews?" And they cried out again, "Crucify him." And Pilate said to them, "Why? What evil has he done?" But they shouted all the more, "Crucify him." So Pilate, wishing to satisfy the crowd, released for them Barabbas, and having scourged Jesus, he delivered him to be crucified. May the Lord add his blessings to the reading of his word. Well, what does it mean to be strong, to be mature? What do you have to do? Now, some people seem to think that maturity is just a matter of years, like rings on a tree. You gain one layer of it every year. I'm old enough to be your father, so you should listen to me. But if maturity is a matter of character, and character is a matter of choices, if you've been making bad choices for 80 or 90 or 100 years, you could be very old but still be immature. If you've gone to the gym for 50 years and never picked up heavy weights, never exerted yourself, well, you're still going to be weak. If you always take the easy path, you'll still have a weak character. In the movie Scent of a Woman, retired Lieutenant Colonel Frank Slade, played by Al Pacino, blinded by his own foolish mistakes, gives a great, although typically unrealistic, Hollywood-like speech in which he defends his young high school friend, Charlie Sims. Sims had made the hard decision to protect his friends, even when it would get him expelled, cost him a scholarship to Harvard. It could cost him his entire future. It could cost him a great career. But, insists Colonel Slade, Charlie has integrity, banging his walking stick on the table. He's willing to do what is hard. Others, like Slade himself, he admits, knew what was right, but found it too hard. So they didn't do it. They went with the flow, like a dead fish. And even dead fish can swim downstream. If you've always taken the path of least resistance, if you always did the easy thing, if you only exercise until you get tired, you diet until you get hungry, you stay away from bad relationships until you get lonely, you read the Bible and pray until you lose the thrill, you'll be a faithful church member until there's a price to be paid. You'll put the word into practice until it means having to give. If that's the way you've been, it doesn't matter how long you live, how long you've been doing it. You'll be weak and immature, a reed shaken in the wind, like a windsock, puffed up and shaking but empty and pointing in whatever direction you're being blown. Maturity is not a matter of years, and strength is not a matter of power. There are people with many years that have never matured, and there are people with a lot of power who are so weak they can't stand up to the slightest winds. Indeed, democracies can promote people like that. In fact, democracies usually promote people like that. People who claim that they are against something when the popular opinion is against it, and then are for it if popular opinion is for it. People who claim they are against homosexual marriage in one election, and then when the polls show it's convenient for them to say so, say they are for it in the next one. We can't just blame the leaders, say they're weak. No, it's the people. It's the people who elect them. They aren't willing to do anything hard. They aren't willing to stand up for something because it's true, no matter what everyone else says, to do justice because it's right, if speaking up against it will cost them something. In this culture, we had so-called spiritual leaders who spoke up against generations past the demon alcohol, because that was the fashionable cause. That's the way the winds of public approval were blowing. It's the way you prove you were tough. Speak up against alcohol. But why weren't they speaking up for justice while people of another race were being legally oppressed? They knew what he has shown you, O man, but to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. How did they not do it? Of course, we know the answer. If they spoke up against that oppression, well, they'd be fired. They'd lose their career. It would be too hard. Here, in Mark 15, we see what happens when a weak man, even a weak man with a lot of power, is faced with the winds of injustice. We see a weak man come face to face with the strongest man who had ever lived, and we see that here in three parts. First, the accusation. Second, the substitution. And finally, the condemnation. As I mentioned last week, the Sanhedrin, the Jews' ruling body, technically wasn't allowed to meet at night. It meant that they were up to no good. But they got around that here by just waiting until the first break of dawn. Notice it says in the morning. They'd been meeting for a while in the dark. Now, in the morning, they held their official session, bang the gavel, court in session, announced their verdict. Jesus is guilty and deserves death. They've been waiting for this. They've been working for this for a while. But there's one more obstacle in their way to carry out their plan. They weren't allowed to implement the death penalty. That right was reserved for the Romans. The Sanhedrin could recommend it, but the Roman governor would have to carry it out. That's a problem for them because they pronounced Jesus guilty of, remember last week, blasphemy. But they know that Pilate isn't going to care about blasphemy. He's not going to execute someone just because they offended the Sanhedrin's religious sensibilities. He could care less. He couldn't care less about their religious sensibilities. Indeed, he seems to have enjoyed just purposely offending them. I mean, if they tell him what a Jesus crucified for blasphemy, Pilate might think, well, good, I don't care. I'll promote him then. After all, he's not elected. They could complain to the emperor about him, but there was no guarantee that the emperor would care either. The emperor could also just want to offend them, for that matter, about their religion. So Pilate had people killed in the temple while offering sacrifices. He set up Roman flags with images of Caesar on them in Jerusalem. Greatly offended the Jewish people. You're not supposed to have images of people. And he didn't care if some renegade rabbi from Galilee was supposedly blaspheming the Jewish God. So they would have to come up with something to charge Jesus with that Pilate would care about. And that was easy. Jesus had said that he was the Christ, he was the anointed one who brings in God's kingdom on earth, the Son of Man brings in God's kingdom. They could tell Pilate that the Messiah is going to overthrow the Romans, he's going to lead a revolt, he's going to rally the people of Israel to be a free, independent, powerful new empire again, like it was under David. That's what Jesus was proposing. That's what they're going to tell Pilate. That's what they believed the Messiah was supposed to be anyway. So it's not hard to come up with that. And his kingdom was really of this world. So they would tell Pilate that Jesus is making himself out to be the king of the Jews. That would get Pilate's attention because his number one job is to keep Israel subjugated, keep it under Roman control. And any threat to that was taken seriously. So when they come in, he's saying he's king of the Jews. Well, Pilate is fully paying attention to this. So they come to Pilate with Jesus bound, handing Jesus over to him with the accusation. He's making himself out to be the king of the Jews. Pilate asked then directly in verse 2, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And Jesus answers briefly, mysteriously, just 2 words in Greek. "You say." That's literally in Greek. Simply, "you say." It's meant to be yes, but it's a kind of yes with a hint. Yes, I'm a king, but not quite like what you mean. In other words, it is as you say, I'm a king, but not exactly as you think. He says enough of a yes to still stay in trouble, to still be a candidate for crucifixion, but he can't fully say yes to what Pilate is asking him. I don't think he's trying to be evasive or cute. He's trying to be precise. He is the king, but not the kind Pilate was worried about. The chief priests then began to pour on accusation after accusation. They wanted to convince Pilate to kill him. He said he's the Son of Man, that he'll be seated on the throne, judging everyone, even us, even you, Pilate. That's what he said, that he's coming to smash all earthly kingdoms, even Rome. He said that he will rule with God's authority over all the earth, even over Rome. He must be stopped. They're trying to appeal to Pilate what he cares about. Many things in verse 3. Many accusations, and the winds are blowing against Jesus. The weak will be carried along with it. One of the tactics of plotters, schemers, naggers, either in politics, relationships, or even churches, is to sway the weak with agitation. Just agitate with many accusations, non-stop accusations, to whip up a sense of a panic, a frenzy that can only be solved, they'll hope you'll agree, by getting rid of the one that they are accusing. Either some politician, a president, a senator, even in churches, some churches, the pastor. He's done this, he's doing that, he said that. Always something. Constant accusations. Even if you try to answer every accusation, it's like playing whack-a-mole. You knock down one, another one pops up. Just non-stop. And the weak eventually conclude that the only way to have peace is to cave into it. Eliminate the one against whom all these accusations are pointed. Maybe if I give in, I'll vote for someone else, I'll cave into the nagging that is always complaining about one thing after another. Then, of course, promises. If you give in to me on this, just this last time, then I'll be nice to you. Until then, they'll keep complaining about many things. And the weak cave into it. Pilate hears these many accusations and asks Jesus in verse 4, have you no answer to make? He's hearing a lot of froth, anger, agitation. He knows they're trying to push his buttons, get him to see Jesus as a revolutionary, a rebel out to lead an uprising against Rome. But he picks up, despite all these these many things of accusations, there's no content. There's nothing specific. There's no actual proof that he's really been a rebel, that he's been organizing some underground army or stockpiling weapons or running a terrorist training camp or not even calling for the overthrow of the Romans. There's a lot of heat. But Pilate picks up, where's the beef? See how many charges they bring against you. Pilate asked Jesus in verse 4. Now, if they could just make one stick, they would stick to that one. But they're trying here to create an impression. So many baseless accusations. There's all this smoke. There's got to be fire somewhere. But Jesus made no further answer in verse 5. And that really amazes Pilate. Jesus isn't trying to defend himself. He's completely composed. This makes Jesus look a lot different than all the many suspects that Pilate has brought before him whom he judges. Normally, a man on trial for his life is going to be frantically trying to prove his innocence, calling the false accusations lies, desperately shouting back, no, I didn't say that, that's wrong. Their life is on the line and they don't care how pathetic they look. Maybe a few hardcore rebels will admit to it and denounce Rome, make some kind of passionate anti-Roman speech as they're being dragged off by the guards. A few would do that. The others would frantically be begging for their life. But Jesus is doing none of that. He's doing neither. He's being accused of all these things for which he could be killed in one of those brutal ways possible. And he says almost nothing. And his composure, his strength, even when it's hard, is amazing. His regal stability under such pressure amazes Pilate. The accusation is that Jesus is a king. The accusation is true. Second, the accusation leads to the substitution, starting in verse 6. Pilate is impressed with Jesus, and he knows from all the empty, shrill accusations and from Jesus' composure that Jesus didn't do anything wrong. What has he done? The accusers are agitated, nearly hysterical, but they have nothing real, Nothing substantial, no real evidence for what they're saying. Pilate now wants to release Jesus. He is supposed to release Jesus. He's called by God and by the Roman Empire to do justice. Now, often God and the Roman government had very different ideas about what justice was, but in this case, they agree. An innocent man should go free. Now, how to release Jesus? That's what Pilate is looking for. A way to let him go, but a way that's not hard. A strong, mature man would just do it. He's innocent. What has he done? He hasn't done anything, I can tell. I'm not ordering his execution just because you don't like him. And he would take that stand, even if it cost him something. Pilate should be able to stand up to their pressure. Issue his verdict that Jesus, he's innocent, order him released, and tell the chief priests, stop bothering me with your personal vendettas. But even dictators have to pay some attention to how people feel. So he thinks of a clever ploy. He'll appeal to democracy. Pilate had a custom of releasing one prisoner at the Passover that the people asked for. In other words, there was some democracy. The people, the demos, got a say in who would be released. And so let the people decide. Vote on it. And he knew that many of the common people didn't respect the priests. And surely they'll ask for Jesus to be let go. That way Pilate thinks, well, he can do the right thing. He can let the innocent man go free and still not make the priest angry. Still not have to make a hard stand. After all, he's got business to do with them regularly. They want to have to face up to their nagging, their discontent, their complaining every day about why he chose to release Jesus. He doesn't want to have to answer a letter from the emperor. If they complained to the emperor that he released a rebel, and the emperor would inquire why. It's just so much paperwork. It's coming under a little bit of suspicion. So you don't want that. That's too hard. Now we can say, well, democracy made me do it. The people spoke, and me, a humble servant of the people, did what they asked. There was another prisoner, a rebel who had committed murder in his opposition to Rome, Barabbas. That's an interesting, simple name. Barabbas, it means son of a father. Bar, son, Abbas, Abba, father. What kind of name is that? And surely every man is a son of a father. A man give birth to a boy. Let's call him son of a father. Well, that pretty much is every boy ever born. And every woman is a daughter of a father. So why such a generic name? A name that doesn't distinguish him from anybody. He's a murderer, he's a thief, he's a rebel. And as a son of a father, he's an everyman. He was like you and me. Well, the crowd came to Pilate to ask for the prisoner of their choice to be released. Now is Pilate's chance. The timing could not be better as far as he's concerned. He does this around Passover. Jesus is brought to him. He can get Jesus off his hands without having to take responsibility. So he asked them a leading question. Notice the leading question. In verse 9, do you want me to release for you the King of the Jews? Put it that way. Well, of course we want our king. That's what he's hoping, they'll think. You want your king. They've been waiting for their king for centuries now. He's the long-expected king, born to set his people free. Pilate wants them to choose Jesus because he knows Jesus is innocent, that Jesus is not the kind of king that Rome was worried about. And he also knows in verse 10, it was out of envy that the chief priests had delivered him up. Envy. Envy is resenting what others have. Now, the accusers, the chief priests, and the rest resented what Jesus had. He had the kingdom, he had authority, he had the rule of God, like the son of the vineyard owner in Jesus' parable of the tenant in chapter 12. Remember that? In chapter 12, the tenants of the vineyard kill the son of the owner because they envied his right to inherit the vineyard. They represented the leaders of Israel in that parable. They represented the very people here who are accusing Jesus, the priests, the scribes, and the elders. Now here, they envied Jesus' right over the temple, over this nation that they thought they led, and yet Jesus really was the rightful leader. The people of God, his authority to do what they claimed to be doing as priests. They claim to be making people right with God, but actually Jesus does it. He had it. They envied it. So they thought, well, if we could kill him, we could get it. We could get what he has. Well, Pilate saw probably not all of that, but he sees at least generally that it was out of envy that they were after Jesus. Envy that at least some of the people loved and they respected Jesus and not them. He was popular. They weren't. They didn't do it. They didn't put him up there to seek to kill him because they cared about blasphemy. They did it because they wanted what he had. Now, Pilate saw that envy was driving their accusations, so he looks for a substitution. He should let Jesus go without a substitute. There shouldn't be any gimmick, any excuse that he has to let Jesus go. He should just do it because he has a duty to let Jesus go. But he wants to shake off responsibility on the people, using his custom of releasing one prisoner to do it, using democracy. It's too hard to make the right decision, so he'll let democracy make it for him. The people will want Jesus as the substitute to be released. He thinks, surely they'll want Jesus more than this Barabbas, this criminal. Surely they prefer Jesus, who did no wrong, over Barabbas, the everyman. That's what he thinks. So he puts it up to democracy. Who will substitute for who? Well, the people Pilate was asking, hoping that they would relieve him of the responsibility for doing what is right, they were full of the priest people, spreading rumors about Jesus, accusing. And Barabbas, sure, he did some things wrong. He got a little carried away for the cause, but he's a patriot, not like Jesus. Jesus said pay taxes to Caesar, right? Jesus did this, he said that, one thing after another. It's just exhausting trying to keep up with all the accusations until finally, even if you can't substantiate even one of those accusations, well, you conclude it's just easier to get rid of him. Protecting his rights, doing justice, that's just too hard. Weak people choose what's convenient, not what's right. Here the chief priests had prepped the crowd so that instead of following Pilate's leading question, do you want me to release for you the king of the Jews? In verse 11, they asked for Barabbas instead, son of a father. Barabbas is scheduled for execution, for crucifixion. He's guilty. He deserves it. Pilate wants him to be crucified and the innocent Jesus to be let free. That's what Pilate wants. He has the power to do it. But he's a weak man. Weak man with power. He first pathetically hopes that Jesus will give him a good reason to let him go, say something that I can let you go with. And then now he wants the democracy to do it for him. He's amazed that Jesus doesn't say anything. He doesn't try to talk his way out. Jesus stays quiet. Now he's hoping the crowds will let him do the right thing without having to take responsibility. That's what weak men do. They refuse to take responsibility. They'll do whatever the strongest currents around them carry them away to do. They'll be swept along into immorality if their lust moves them that way. They'll give all their time to their business, making money, none to God. If their greed, if the invitation of mammon, you can serve me and God, if it moves them along that way. The deceitfulness of riches moves them that way. Maybe they'll even go to church if their wife nags them enough, but they're not doing it for the Lord. Or maybe they'll drop out of a biblical church if their wife nags them to do that too. They might know what is right, like Pilate here. People might tell them plainly what is right, but they think it's just too hard. They're swept along like a dead fish downstream. Pilate's too weak to do what is right, and so he hopes democracy will relieve him of the responsibility. Do you want me to release for you your king? No, they say. We want the rebel. That's what sinners always choose, rebels over the king. And Pilate is just flummoxed. And so we ask in verse 12, notice in verse 12, he's asking. Why is he asking? He knows what's right. He has the power to do it. Why won't he do it? Because he thinks it's too hard. He wants to be a politician. He wants to make people happy more than he wants to do what is right. And he asks them, then what shall I do with the man you call the king of the Jews? They shout back, "Crucify him," in verse 13. And Pilate asked back in verse 14, "Why? What evil has he done?" Pilate, you just answered your own question. If you can't find that he's done any evil, you must let him go. You can't crucify an innocent man just to placate a clamoring, hysterical mob. What's he done? But they're unreasonable. They shout louder and louder, "Crucify him!" He has the power to do the right thing. All he has to say is, "No, I'm going to let him go. He's done no wrong." And he's sending his troops, if he has to disperse the crowd, armed with their whips and clubs. He knows Jesus is innocent. He knows what is right, but he thinks it's too hard. So he blows in the wind. Finally, there's the condemnation. Pilate in verse 15, wishing to satisfy the crowd, wanting to make the murderous mob happy, taking the path of least resistance, caving in to the nagging, blown by the wind like a windsock, going with the flow, wishing to satisfy the crowd, the worst verdict of a man's character possible. Like weak people a generation or more ago who knew that they were supposed to do justice, but were afraid for their careers, or today who know what's right, who know the absurdity of a quote, homosexual marriage, or the absurdity that someone can change their sex, or the importance of going to church, or keeping your covenants, or hearing the word, following the word, seeking first the kingdom of God, so giving. But it's just too hard. When the family puts pressure on, the family wants to make a few more dollars on Sunday morning, and so sees that as more important than worship. Or maybe the boyfriend who wants sex, or the kids who want what they want, the friends who want you to be tolerant in the new, very intolerant definition of the word. And so to satisfy them, you cave. You go with the flow. It's just too hard. Lose money, lose opportunities, get criticized for truth, lose friends for Jesus. So here this weak man issues the condemnation. Jesus is crucified because a weak man couldn't stand up and do what he knew was right. He thought it was too hard. What makes you think you would do differently if you're too weak now to do what's right? So Pilate had Jesus scourged for no reason, just to satisfy the crowds. The scourging would be with a whip with many lashes on it, pieces of a bone or lead or rocks tied into it. It would sometimes rip off pieces of flesh. Often two men would do it, pairing off, alternating from two sides of the victim. They could do it until the ribs are showing. Some men would die just from the scourging. These are the stripes with which we are healed. And here, the same crowds that were cheering for Jesus just the Sunday before. It's Friday, and just the previous Sunday, these crowds were shouting, "Hosanna," putting palm branches in front of Jesus, hailing him as their king. And they've gone from cheers on Sunday to jeers on Friday. The disciples are nowhere to be found. They said they would not forsake Jesus. They would follow him wherever he goes. They would lay down their life for him. But now when they see he's on trial, when he's being scourged, they decide that it's just too hard to do what they said they would do. And now the king is being stretched out and bent over and having the skin of his back ripped off because weak people can't do what they know is right. Will you do what you know is right when it's hard, when it means you lose money, get criticized, get rejected? Will you? Jesus is condemned to death, but the condemnation Doesn't stop there. It doesn't stop with Jesus. Pilate is condemned for murdering the only truly righteous one. He's responsible, whether he takes responsibility or not. But there's more to the story, more than just a morality tale. In Acts chapter 4, verse 28, the apostles prayed. This would just be a few weeks after all this happened. The apostles prayed, speaking to God. They say that what Pilate decided was God what your hand and your plan had predestined to take place. Pilate did what he did, as weak and sniveling and cowardly and spineless as he was, because God determined that he would. Now, does that mean that Pilate is free of condemnation because he was just God's instrument to carry out God's plan? No. Pilate did what he did. He murdered the only truly innocent person who had ever lived, because that's the kind of man he was. A sniveling, cowardly, spineless man who couldn't do what is right because he thought it was too hard. That's who he was. And so God put him in that position because this is far more than a morality tale about how we need to grow up and be strong, be principled, have integrity like Charlie Sims, how we need to have a spine and do what's right even when everyone else is pressuring us to cave in. It is that, but it's far more than that. It's beyond that. God's hand and plan predestined that this would take place because we needed a substitute. What's he done? Pilate asked, what's he done? What's he done? He's become our substitute, and he's taken our condemnation. We are like Barabbas, the son of a father, the son of Adam, like every man. We are, like him, rebels. And as rebels, we deserve condemnation. The accusations against us are true. We are sentenced to punishment for our rebellion. An infinite crime against an infinite king deserves an infinite punishment. But then amazingly, there's a substitute. Jesus steps forward. He is the king himself. He's the king against whom we rebelled, and he's the king who offers himself as the substitute, the one we rebelled against. But he doesn't take the easy way out. He knows it's hard, but he does it anyway. The Lord lays on him the iniquity, the condemnation of us all. So he is stretched out and scourged and crucified so that our rebellion, our weakness, our relationship with God could be healed. By his stripes, we are healed. That's what he's done.